Hello, welcome back to the podcast. And this week,
what week is it?
This is week 14.
Week 14.
And what we're doing this week is we are looking at the West and moral paradoxes in virtual or fictional worlds. So your readings this week were from Tor C. Olson's Red Dead's History, chapters 13 through 17. You're also required to read the paper by Montefiore and Formosa. If you're a graduate student, you should be reading the papers by Luck and Ramirez as well.
And it's amazing that a philosopher has the last name Luck.
It is. Yes, it's incredible.
You couldn't script that.
No, you couldn't. Yeah.
Better.
So that's what we're going to focus on today. Although in the context of history, we thought we would take not exactly a detour, since it's certainly discussed, but really kind of hone in and zoom in on one particular thing, which is the Wilmington Massacre. And then we'll talk at the end a little bit about the gamer's dilemma, generalizing from it, and some ways to respond to it. So that's what we're doing today.
And one of the, if you have a chance, and it's within the same time period, and I think we've discussed this film, The Wild Bunch from 1969. Yes. Yeah. You might find the YouTube clip that I think it's the one of the last scenes of the film, and it's about 9 minutes or so. But it's
the Battle of something, right?
Yeah, it's at the end when sort of the people that you've been following, the group, which is very much has this Red Dead feel to it. Yeah. They're going to go get their buddy, and there's a shootout breaks out, and in terms of film history, it's one of the early, a little more graphic violence. Yeah. I think John Wayne did not like this movie at all. Yeah. He thought it was
didn't care for it.
Yeah, he thought it was an insult to Westerns.
Not honorable.
Yeah.
Insufficiently American.
Really, and there's one little element in there that we in class we've been discussing across all video games, but the moment that you're attacking or fighting with antagonists and civilians get in the crossfire and you take them out. And this scene has a quick little moment where the wrong person gets shot, but the scene keeps going. And it's just kind of illustrating the chaos of the moment.
That's right, yeah.
But within film history, that's definitely a taboo that was crossed within the film. But from Olson's book, one of the episodes from history he mentions is the 1898 Wilmington Massacre, which if we were situating ourselves within the game, obviously this would be somewhere between Saint Denis and what's that town in between? That's very it's kind of a dying town.
It's not Valentine. Are you talking about the ranch?
Haven, something. Van Horn.
It's Van Horn. Oh, the trading post.
Yeah, the Van Horn. Yeah. So it's probably somewhere in there, but it's the Carolinas, right? Like I think there's this, and again, 1898 Wilmington Massacre. It's a year before what would have been the game, so it's the same era. And this is a really fascinating sort of episode in U.S. history. For one, it literally was a coup. Yeah. And so there were state elections, we say maybe it's the sort of city elections, and there was a fusionist party that pulled together white populists with really a sort of black middle class, political party. Yeah. And they're not supposed to be working together, right? Because of the Jim Crow, Plessy v. versus Ferguson is 2 years before, white supremacy has already been reinstilled across the South. Yeah. But because of economics, those two groups work together and they win this election. Yeah. And what happens is the conservatives, which become the Democrats, they literally have a violent coup, overthrow the party. They burn down one of the main leaders of the black middle class. Can't remember his name, but he was a newspaper guy. Yes. And they burned down the newspaper building, hundreds, massacred, and then there's an exodus of people that leave. Yeah. the important thing in this, and I think this is working through the game, is this sort of populist, right? This populist theme that Arthur, you could argue that Arthur is a part of that. I mean, Dutch, most of the gang kind of has this anti-corporate.
Anti-industry.
Yeah. At the same time, they're going to be farmers somewhere doing mangoes.
That's right.
Right. So it's this sort of American, we're working hard, I guess, being outlaws.
Yeah.
But we also don't like this sort of corporate greed that's occurring. And there is this, this propaganda effort, which, as you'll see on the screen there, various posters, right? This, a serious question: how long will this last? Right, with this foot on, the Negro, right on the pant leg there. The foot's on the white man, and that's a part of that post-Reconstruction reframing Black participation in politics as oppression towards white. Right, this other poster, a warning: get back. We will not. We will not stand up. And it's the honest white man. There's also the red shirts, which I always think of as they're KKK adjacent. Yeah. Right. It's not
so quite similar to the Lemoyne Raiders.
Yeah, very much Lemoyne Raiders. And here you have this little clip from a newspaper: attention white men, there will be a meeting. Full attendance desired as business and the furtherance of white supremacy will be transacted.
Yeah, I thought that was particularly interesting because I think sometimes people think about the term white supremacy as like a newfangled academic term, and the fact that it is directly in this newspaper article from 1890s is like, oh no, it is a thing. Yeah, right? It is a concept that was directly invoked.
Yeah, and it's proudly thrown out there. Yeah. It's. I think that's one of those things that's erased.
It is
from history, or when you make textbooks, you don't want to put that in there because you have markets, Texas, right? Those types of things. And then this next set of images here, it's basically whites who participated in this sort of the mob action, burning down businesses.
Yeah. Was it 9 to 11 people died, at least from the newspaper articles or something?
Yeah, hundreds run in the woods, 9 Negroes shot down in the streets of Wilmington. Yeah. And then this sort of final newspaper, right? I think this is celebratory.
Yes, thank you.
11 Negroes.
The guy who had his newspaper burned down, right?
Yeah, this is a Manly, last name Manly, the defamer of white womanhood, which is, right, that's that cue for code for miscegenation, that sort of thing. So it's interesting because, so this event happens, and then, we think of the history of this. Yeah. It's, how is this remembered? Yeah. And a lot of this is related to the Lost Cause, which Olson talks about. Really, the Lost Cause is like a propaganda effort involving public monuments. And it's rebuilding the reputation of the South post-Reconstruction. Yeah. To make, sort of, the Civil War was about states' rights. It wasn't about slavery. Yeah. Those types of things.
It's about autonomy or something. Despite, of course, the documents and what those documents written at the time directly
literally say slavery. But in the history books here, like from 1916, A Child's History of North Carolina, it's the Fusion legislature put the city largely under Negro rule. The government of the city was badly carried on and lawlessness prevailed. Right, so when the idea was that this group was put into power and they enjoyed actual power, and that there was this lawlessness prevailing.
So they're either malicious or
but the coup happens, if not a day after. Like there is no government.
There's no period.
Yeah, there's no period. But according to 1916 history book, there is. After the riot was over, the incompetent Negro and the white officers of the city were forced to resign, the Fusionist Party, one by one, which the idea it's orderly, right? One by one, incompetent white men chosen in their places.
And competent white men.
And that's interesting because you have the Darren Beatty tweet from a year ago, right? He's, I think he's assistant under public undersecretary of public policy.
Okay.
And a year ago, he was installed with, in January. A year ago, he tweeted about you need to have competent white men.
Oh yes.
Right. Which we'll put there. And it's interesting that like that really stuck out when when we were putting this together. I'm like, oh my, there's the phrase, competent white men.
Yeah.
Right. So there's this precedent for reimagining ideas between like white men and sort of these, in this case, African Americans.
So this almost gets back to that classical racialism. Taylor was talking about, right?
Yeah.
Of that thick covariance of not just some kind of phylogenetic differences or whatever, but also you have like the covariance of like competence and intelligence or these other kind of features or qualities by race or something.
1958, right? So this is 40 some years after, right? Quote, Negroes who came to the rally saw the red shirts and silently slipped away. Right, the Negro by nature was friendly and eager to avoid trouble. The Negroes were frightened, and on election day, many stayed at home. The careful planning and leadership of Simmons helped the Democrats. White supremacy was the issue. A few days later, a bad race riot took place in Wilmington. Negroes were killed, and both Negroes and white men were wounded. Many Negroes fled from the town. The Revolution of 1898 restored white supremacy. So in this case, interestingly, like it's the coup now is a revolution.
Yeah.
Again, if you're reading this in 1958, it's the revolution against tyranny, which was this fusionist party that was elected but really never took office because of the massacre. Yeah. So really interesting stuff. I don't think when we teach history, we don't.
Well known.
We don't teach. Yeah, we don't teach how the history was taught over time.
Previously, sure.
Because to me, that's real. That's just another layer, right?
Yeah.
Like how events change shape over time.
Yeah.
And then you have in 2006. By 2006, actual historians are involved, or non-white supremacist historians are involved, and. Kenneth Townsend writes, quote, at no time did blacks ever enjoy representation equal to their numbers, nor did Negro rule ever exist in North Carolina, etc. And then you have, throughout Wilmington, you have these, monuments that kind of, that talk about basically what was happening. But it's, I think the Wilmington Massacre, like the Tulsa Massacre in 1921,
that's another thing. I didn't know about that until I was in Oklahoma. Like I never was taught about that just going through schooling when I was younger. The Tulsa massacre.
Yeah, same with I didn't until grad school. And I think these are interesting because it really rubs up against the the sort of the celebrationist idea of American history, right? It's which is silly, right? I think history just should be. We should just look at like sort of how did the events unfold. I think once you put celebratory language into it, it becomes like propaganda.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. Like it's just a PR thing. But these little moments like this kind of highlight structural elements that can disappear if we remove some of these events. Yeah. The other part too that we were working through and that I think are important to think about is sort of the women's voting theme in the game.
Yeah.
Because even just women in video games itself is could be just a topic of a class, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I teach one on film, women in film.
Oh, sure.
But another class easily could be just women in video games, and sort of the role of the West in this. And I think this is another one of those a misremembering or perhaps being surprised at what actually happened in the sense that women getting the right to vote in Wyoming in 1869, one of the earliest. Yeah. Really? Like Wyoming,
not what you would expect.
Right? Yeah. Kind of thinking of all the stereotypes of like out west, it's 1869.
Yeah.
And in Wyoming, they give the women the right to vote. And the sort of the interesting thing is it was to attract more women to the territory because of this skewed ratio of men to women. And it's just like, well, more women will come to Wyoming if there's this right that they can have there that they can't have anywhere else.
Sure. Yeah.
And then these other states kind of follow the pattern. Utah, Washington, 1883, Colorado, Idaho in 1899. And then the part that's kind of surprising, but then again, it shouldn't be surprising.
Kind of incongruous in terms of our expectations, maybe, or something.
Yeah, it's the East is so slow to do it because you have entrenched parties that did not want to upset this balance that
existed. You don't want to add
existed.
basically a whole nother voting pool because
Yes.
it's like 50% of the populace, and so
that would just tip.
even though they're the cultured, intelligent,
Yes.
smart, big city ones, and all these people in Wyoming are
pioneers. Yeah, and sitting around a fire, and
that's right.
They can't read, but they can write really well in their journal.
That's right, just like Arthur. That's right.
But we were, in the other parts too, and I think this goes into the the gamer's paradox or the gamer's dilemma with like women in games. Right, we had Gamergate.
Mm-hmm.
10 years or 20 years
Something
ago
like
now,
that, I guess.
somewhere in that late in the mid 2000s.
Yeah, I think that's right around then.
And it had to do with women participating in. I think online probably that's probably the sore spot for boys who are mad that women are in the sandbox trying to play with their toys. But it does go into these discussions we had this week.
Absolutely, yeah. So our discussion of Montefiore and Formosa and Ramirez and Morgan Luck is the person who originally developed this. And so, of course, once you develop something that's like new and interesting, not only do other people write about it, but then you can like reply, and so you can just kind of churn out lots of articles and things relating to it. So I want to talk about the original Gamer's Dilemma, and then what I think is actually a little more interesting is just the broader application of it. So the Gamer's Dilemma as first sort of developed by Luck. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the paradox of fictionally going too far. We'll think about the application to the game Red Dead Redemption 2 that we're playing. Talk about some potential resolutions, and then we'll end maybe with some questions or thoughts. So the way that this dilemma is set up, and strictly, it's not exactly it's not strictly a dilemma. It's a trilemma, I guess, or whatever. Because there's 3 propositions instead of 2, but it's basically set up as here's 3 propositions. And they might individually be, convincing or plausible, but you can't hold them all to be true at the same time. So which of them do you reject, or where is the problem, right? And so the Gamer's Dilemma, as Luck developed it in, I think, 2016, the first proposition is that virtual murder is morally permissible. If you read the article, he just says permissible. It's pretty clear what he means is like morally permissible. It's okay for us to virtually murder. Think about... everyone now who's been playing Red Dead, if you broke Micah out, you murdered a bunch of townsfolk. Yeah. Right?
At this point, you
have engaged in some pretty significant virtual murder, right? And presumably you think it's okay, or at least sort of okay. The second proposition is there's no relevant difference between virtual murder and virtual child molestation or pedophilia in respect to being morally permissible. And then the third premise is that virtual child molestation or pedophilia is morally impermissible. So when we were discussing this in class, I think a couple people were like, wait, where'd that come from, right? Like, who wants that or whatever? And I think that the point of it is really that both of these things, or when we think about murder in the real world as well as like child sexual assault in the real world, those are both really horrific, morally off the table, like deeply inappropriate. You're obligated not to do them kinds of things, right? We have the same kind of judgment about them. But we don't have the same kind of judgment about them in a virtual space. We're very comfortable murdering, killing people in a virtual space. We're not so comfortable, presumably for the most part, with something else like child molestation going on, even in a virtual space. So,
arguably, he's going after the murder part.
Yes,
but he 100%. Brings this horrifying crime.
Yeah, and he thinks we're going to have the same intuitions about these being like, oh my God, these are horrific, and yet we are very blasé about one, but one is like still very much like absolutely not forbidden, right? And so he's really trying to get us to think like, what is the difference there? And the paper by Montefiore and Formosa, they kind of expand this into the paradox of fictionally going too far. So the way they do this is to say their proposition one, just to kind of make this a little more general, X cases of engaging with fictional wrongdoing A are morally permissible. X and A are just variables here. You can fill in the blank as we go through. The second proposition is there's no relevant difference between X cases of engaging with fictional wrongdoing A and Y cases of engaging with fictional wrongdoing B in respect of being morally permissible. And then that third proposition is Y cases of engaging with fictional wrongdoing B are morally impermissible. So again, the idea is just, it doesn't have to just be murder. We do a lot of things in the game that are probably not morally permissible in real life, but we're okay to do them. And there's lots of stuff we can't do in the game, not just something like child molestation, that we don't think is permissible, right? Now, in both cases, the real life actions, Luck and others seem to think we will all broadly agree can't do those things in real life, but it is a little weird that we can do some of them virtually and not do some of them, right? And so he's really trying to figure out what is the principle of difference there. So if we want to think about this application to the game, there's lots of stuff you can do in the game that is, putatively immoral. So there's murder, a lot of murder, sometimes pretty horrific, and it can involve pretty horrific deaths, right? I mean, you can set people on fire and they die by being burned to death. That is absolutely terrible and horrifying in a certain way, right? That's not like nice euthanasia of injecting someone with something. That is a terrible, painful, drawn-out death. You can tie people up and put them on the railroad tracks. You can tie people up and leave them in the wilderness for animals to get them or for them to die of exposure or starvation. Yeah. All of that's really horrifying, right? But the game just lets you do it. Of course, you can steal from people. You steal from banks. You steal from individuals. You can rob people. You arguably exploit the poor, or at the very least, at least some of the people, many of the people it seems like that Strauss has loaned money to are not very well off, and you're going there and basically being a loan shark, right, and coming in to enforce the loan. All of those things, I think it is intuitive that we think those are morally objectionable, and yet the game just lets us do them, sometimes without much condemnation or controversy or cause for reflection. But think about lots of the things that you can't do in the game. So, of course, all of you know by now, or if you've reached this area, the Wapiti Reservation, which is in kind of the northern part of the map, you can't even draw your gun. They just don't let you. Like, weapons are just not allowed there, right? And I don't remember if it's the developers, I believe they've talked about this, of like, we didn't want to let that happen because we knew people in the game would go there and basically be like, well, I guess I get to massacre a bunch of natives here. Yeah. And so you have to disallow that. Think about Arthur's sexual morality, right? So what I mean by that is, Arthur, if you go to like some of the saloons where there are sex workers, they'll come up to you and say basically, hey, do you want to have a good time? And Arthur, you have choices, but they're basically two variants of saying no. So for Arthur, that's off limits, and that's for the player character. That's off limits, right? In many games, I have not tried. In every game, we apparently had a student who told us there is a way to kill children in Red Dead Redemption 2. I have not tried to do this. He said you have to basically, you get them in a boat on the water, and then you explode the boat, and it sinks, and they drown or something. But otherwise, you can't just shoot any of the children in the game. And generally, in many games, doing things harming children is just off limits for the most part. Like, think about all the Fallout games. You can do some really egregious stuff in the Fallout games. The game just generally does not let you kill or harm children in the game. So,
and there really aren't that many children in the game.
That's right. In Red Dead Redemption 2.
Saint Denis has quote the street
urchins, the street kids.
They're always
running around
saying things
and stuff.
about you, making
That's
fun
right.
of you.
Yeah.
But outside of that,
they just aren't.
They're really aren't. It's just adults.
Yeah. It's primarily adults. That's exactly right. Yeah. And then, or even just think about Arthur's moral compass regarding race and sex. So, for example, even if you're doing a low honor playthrough, Arthur doesn't start handing out slurs left and right, right? That just is not allowed in the game. So there are some things that we recognize in real life are immoral, but in the game you can do it, and other things we recognize are also in real life immoral, and in the game you can't do it, right? So the interesting thing is to figure out what principle thing explains this. Obviously, in some cases, there's a very practical money-making explanation, which is the game is not going to make money if Arthur's doing all of this stuff, or even if it allows you to. Sometimes that's going to be controversial. And we talked about a variety of cases like this, where maybe they developed something in the past, but it went so badly, or they realized, our moral sensibility has changed, or whatever, and so we have to do it a little differently. So there's a number of ways to try to resolve this that the Luck article discusses. And I think Ramirez is one of the responses that he talks about. I don't think Formosa and Montefiore are. But I think they talk about these, although they don't use this language. This is from the Luck 2022 article. So you could resolve the dilemma, and that's by rejecting Proposition 2. Remember, Proposition 2 is that there's no relevant difference between virtual murder and virtual child molestation, or acts of one kind and acts of another, in terms of being morally permissible. The dissolution, you can either reject P1 or P3. That is, it's probably not super likely to reject P3, Proposition 3, that virtual child molestation is morally permissible. Although, if you've ever been on Steam and looked at Steam, there are these things that are basically, there's a whole sort of subgenre, not, I think, of a lot of like big gaming companies, but what are essentially rape simulators. And in some of them, as Ramirez talks about, the individuals depicted appear to be quite similar looking to children. And so those could count as something like that. But you're not going to have like AAA gaming studios developing something like that, right? And generally speaking, people mostly, I think, are not willing to reject that as a way to dissolve it. The Ramirez article that you read, if you're a grad student, is kind of a rejection of premise 1 or Proposition 1, which is that virtual murder is morally permissible. If you recall, his view is it is when it's handled in a pretty clunky way that's removed. But when you start making it more like what it actually would be like in real life, people, maybe their intuitions change about whether it's permissible or not. So, and then you have resistance, and this is what Luck thinks that Formosa and Montefiore are doing, which is basically saying, here are reasons to think that maybe these intuitions about Propositions 1 or 3 are not as widespread, or there's other things going on there, right? And so if we're thinking about relevant factors that ground the judgments, part of this, and this is, I think, a way that the Ramirez article is really thoughtful, is aesthetic reasons and faithful representation. So, the more faithfully you're representing whatever this horrific thing is, the more morally troubling many of us find it, the more psychologically and emotionally troubling we find it. Whereas if you depict it at a way very far removed, it's just some polygons or something, then it's a little more acceptable or easier. For example, Luck, gives the example of like killing people in Grand Theft Auto. But as Ramirez points out, but most of the NPCs in Grand Theft Auto are pretty one-dimensional. They aren't really like people. They don't really. It's not clear that you act really. They really act like they've died in a way. It's like not faithfully represented. And you die all the time and come back, right? And so like that's not really how death works. And so it removes us from the way it actually would be. Whereas as Ramirez says, the torture scene in GTA 5. Even when it came out, many people found it quite challenging. And part of that, he thinks, and he gives, I think, a good reason to think this, is because when you do that, it shifts from the third person to the first person. All the HUD, right, those kind of on-screen diagrams are removed, and you are like right there in it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is a very different way than if I've got like my mini map and my ammo wheel and all of this other stuff on the screen, clearly indicating that it's a video game, right? And so that could be a thing that maybe is relevant in these intuitions and figuring this out. There could, of course, be social, that is, non-moral, conventional norms and emotional reactions. So, maybe murder just does not strike people as having the kind of emotional reaction of disgust, the way something like pedophilia or child molestation does have that reaction for people, right? And then there are also, maybe some different meta-ethical accounts. Montefiore and Formosa talk about this as well. And, of course, reasons to doubt the relevance of immediate intuitive responses. So those are some potential resolutions. What we talked about also in the class, and just not individually, together, right? Dr. McClure and I were discussing this a little bit, is just how different are our intuitions about this in terms of like how much does gaming as an interactive kind of medium, right? Going back to last week, thinking about when, and thinking about the idea that like the medium in gaming is almost agency. Mm-hmm. It's you're interacting with things. Does that change it versus like thinking about how some really, going fictionally too far act might be depicted in literature or in film. Those, we might think of those as passive, but that's not really quite right? Because it requires like reading a book requires intellectual engagement. You're modeling, you're imagining, you're doing stuff. And even watching a movie, it's not like, vision just doesn't work this way, right? Like it's not like you're just getting what's there. You're interpreting it. You're thinking about it. Your attention is drawn to certain salient features of some scenes over another. You talk to your friends about what do you think that meant, right? All of that involves you sort of engaging. But in literature and in film, with a few exceptions. You don't really get to choose how the characters act or how you want them to act. Whereas in games, with few exceptions, you do. Right. So in the game, you had to kill all those people in Strawberry to get Micah out, but there's whole lots of times where it's really up to you. Do you want to kill someone or let him go, like in the very beginning of the game? Yeah. Do you want to rob a person or just say hello to them? That's all up to you, right?
I guess the when we think about like the novel or film, so I guess Wayne Gibson's Neuromancer. Right?
Yes.
Off in my head.
Yeah.
It's as if you could start that book.
Yeah.
And then intuitively weave through it the way you wanted to.
Yeah.
So the book would be read differently each time.
Yeah.
Right? Which doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There's a version of that for people that are old enough. I think it's still around, but the Choose Your Own Adventure.
I remember those. Yeah, Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Yeah. So that to me,
That's
I think
kind of the. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that to me was exciting. I was one of those I didn't read. I just drew and played Legos.
Yeah.
But I loved reading those. I think, looking back, because it was, I was able to make decisions in it.
Yeah.
And then I could read it different ways.
Yeah.
And so there's that clunky.
Yeah.
It's funny. I mean, I don't really know the history, but at least they were popularized in the 80s, which is absolutely the era of the home gaming system where it explodes, right?
That's
like Atari to personal computers to eventually
NES
with the Nintendo.
Yeah, Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yeah, I think that's like 86,
80-something,
85, 86 maybe.
Yeah.
And so the fact that those arrive
at the same time
in a similar, so there's the thirst of a market, market for simulation.
That's right. Yeah.
It's funny too because I just had a conversation earlier today with, right. I think that's the like. So when we think of AI, Gen AI.
Yeah.
So Gen AI on the one hand, for most people, it's the first thing that their mind triggers is like students using it to write papers.
Sure. Yeah.
Which for listeners, like you can tell when it's an AI paper. Like it is so obvious that it's AI written.
Yeah.
But the real promise I think of Gen AI and education is the fact that it creates a simulation.
Yeah.
And so you really, I think for educators, it's how do you mobilize the possibilities of that to create the simulation.
Sure. Yeah.
And in a way, I think, we did an ad hoc version of that by doing this class. Because in a way the class is a simulation of both walking through philosophical concepts, but also shooting through
a wide swath
American history.
That's right, yeah.
And then it is a fake world with fake places.
Yeah.
But I think we know enough, and there's enough, scholarship with Olson and
that's right.
the collected essays we used last summer that we can reverse engineer what the game is trying to portray with the realities.
That's right.
I think the simulation element is incredible in the sense of that article on birding.
Mm-hmm. That Audubon article.
Where he's playing it to watch birds.
That's
the reason why you play it.
Well, and even that, I remember thinking that one of the funniest things about that is, right, he killed and skinned a fox and then went away, and then he noticed something, so he takes his binoculars out and looks, and there's like a couple of the other animals or whatever like coming to get the fox corpse, and it's just like, he might not have looked at that, and they still would have done it. So like, there is a complex layer of things happening to simulate stuff in the game. Yeah. It's really incredible. So I think that gives rise to this question of like, what kinds of things is it okay to represent? What is the intention of representing those things? And then what is the sort of experiential fidelity or the perspectival fidelity of it? Like how much does it really get to what it would be like to do that in the way of that, like, in the Neuromancer novels, in the Sprawl trilogy, they talk about SimStim technology. Yeah. And in Cyberpunk 2077, they talk about brain dances. And it's all this way of...
Days from
1995.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's what's the Pandora's box of simulation.
Yeah.
right? Which I always think of. What was the Minority Report?
Yeah.
Right. I think isn't that the one where he goes to
the precogs?
Yeah, but I think he goes to a place to shake down someone.
Yeah.
And it's machines where people are plugged in.
Oh, yes.
And it's really just to go, and it's basically sexual, like fantasies type stuff.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
And then, Cyberpunk, I think, really plays off, right? This, if that Pandora's box is opened.
Yeah. Will people just waste away?
Yeah.
Because, they'll wake up from their fantasy life long enough to, use the bathroom and eat a nutrition pellet or whatever, and then escape their crappy little life by going. This is how it's used in many cases in the Sprawl trilogy. Mm-hmm. One of the Count, who's in I think the second novel of that, his mother is basically described as someone who all she ever does is like watch her. She engages in her Simpsons because her life sucks.
Yeah.
And so this is a way to basically escape it. And if you can escape it in a way that is that real and feels that real, I don't know. Why wouldn't you? A certain way.
Yeah.
So this goes back all the way back to early in the class. We're talking about hedonism to the experience machine by Nozick, right? Would you plug in?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's what we talked about this week. We hope that you enjoyed it. And we're going to try, this will be coming out, probably Friday or Saturday or something. So we're going to try to be getting you comments on your draft back in the next several days. If we need to, we'll adjust the due date to make sure, we'll make sure you have a full 7 days to incorporate any feedback. The stuff that, I don't know, I always like reading the outputs of the class. So it's been very interesting and enjoying. And I'm glad you all have been on the journey with us to engage in thinking about history and ethics in the 19th century American West. So,
let's see you next week.
See you later.